Well, it's midsummer 2022. Plenty of great days for hiking and outdoor recreation the last few months, but not much rain. Many areas in central and eastern New England and southern New England are running at least less than a half of their normal rainfall during the first part of this year, from midwinter on. Not much snow, not much rain, and a lot of scratchy paddling to be had. So a canoe trip could turn into a canoe hike. Personally, I've been on a few of those and it's not much fun after a few miles. So what we've got planned for canoeing this year, at least for right now, is some flat water paddling and trying to find some scenic places to flat water paddle. So we'll make up for the long distance paddles for some shorter, more scenic paddles, or very scenic paddles. We've got Lantern Hill Pond here. This is New London County, Connecticut. It's 500 feet above sea level at the top and about 100 feet at the pond, with some sheer quartzite cliffs making up at least a half of that 500 feet. It's popular with hikers, it's popular with rock climbers, and has great views extending for 40 to 50 miles in all directions. Did a little hike up there back in February recording oak trees for my other channel. If you look at Barking Up the Right Tree, that channel, and the Barking Up the Right Oak Part 1, I was on Lantern Hill. I found 6 species of oak up there, all in about a 2-hour period. So let's get in the boat here. Let's do some flat water paddling. This is maybe, I don't know, 20 or 30 acres. Lots of stuff in bloom this time of year, so we can make up for our distance with some scenery. I see a heron right now. This is late afternoon, early. We might be able to sneak up on some wildlife. And that heron is right in there amongst the water lilies. And usually they're a little shy, so don't be surprised if he takes off here. And meanwhile, we're going to put the paddle in the water, and we're going to stitch this video onto another one in a few days. So we'll have several segments of several different bodies of water that are retaining enough water to paddle without running into a canoe hike situation with extremely low water levels. And a few hundred feet from the boat launch, we get out of the white and yellow pond lily out into some deeper water. I cannot see the bottom. This is fairly tannic or tea colored with a lot of tannic acid. So I believe this is a natural body of water, and the one just to our south, Long Pond, I believe is natural as well. That one has houses on it, but this one doesn't. So a pristine feel here. It could be quite deep. There's a fault zone on both sides of Lantern Hill here. It is an intrusion of quartzite that is much younger than the surrounding rocks. So quite a bit of geological activity around here in the past that's created these weaknesses where the glaciers could scour out these basins for the ponds. And this late afternoon filtered sunshine is making for some great photo ops here. The reflection of these pond lilies. I think we got 3 varieties here. That oval shaped one that's about 2 inches long in the foreground. Right above it here in the center of the screen, the round shaped leaf that's about 4 to 5 inches around is from our white pond lily. And there's even some larger ones of similar shape, maybe 6 to 8 inches around. Look like a pancake with a slice taken out, or a piece of pie with a slice taken out. And then our heart-shaped ones, like the one in the foreground here, are from the yellow pond lily. Another very common plant along the slower moving rivers and marshes and shallow areas of ponds. It's just starting to get some color, is our pickerel weed. And these leaves come right up out of the water, especially at lower water levels like we're having right now, and they're shaped like an arrowhead. And this will stay in bloom for a few more weeks. It has a quite long blooming cycle. Has a similar color to the the purple loosestrife, which is invasive and beautiful, but also very invasive. And I'm not seeing a lot of it in this particular part of New England, which is a blessing. It may not be fond of the acid waters around here. I'm not sure of that, but maybe it just hasn't made it here yet. But it's very common in the Great Lakes. I've seen lots of it along the Great Lakes and many of the waterways near the Great Lakes. So puts on quite a display, but it is non-native and invasive and drowns out the native plants. Let's head down along the bottom of Lantern Hill and look at some of the shrubs that are in bloom. And just below the cliffs of Lantern Hill, the pond comes right up to the talus slope that is rocks that have broke off that. And we've got a whole bunch of clethra in bloom. Let's stop for a second and we'll take a better look. And we'll zoom in on this clethra, which is called sweet pepper bush for a common name. Starts blooming in late July and keeps blooming right up till around Labor Day. It has blossoms that kind of resemble those of a black cherry, but it does not achieve tree form, but remains a low to medium sized shrub. It's being overshadowed by some alder here, which gets to be almost the size of an understory tree. But again, both of these tend to do much better in full sun. The clethra will grow in wooded swamps, but it gets more flowers when it's in full sun, like just above this log here. It's covered in flowers and covered in bees. I see a bunch of looks like bumblebees enjoying the available nectar. So it's a long blooming cycle for this plant, and the bees will take advantage of that for several weeks here. We got more of this pickerel weed growing in the shallows here, and a quick transition to oaks and maples. There isn't much of a floodplain or even a shoreline here. The talus slope and the boulders come right down to the shoreline here. The trails up Lantern Hill do not feed off this side of the pond, but they come in from the north and from the east, including from the Foxwoods Resort, which is just up the road here. And boy, these dead man's fingers are kind of neat to look at. Again, the sun is low enough now that I can see into the water better than I could at noontime or mid-afternoon. So most of these water plants, the ones that grow in the shallows, can float, so they can make their food without being near the bottom. And a quick transition to, again, some hardwood trees here. I see some chestnut, American chestnut growing right here, a sprout, but 30 feet high, so it's a pretty good sprout. And some mountain laurel coming right up to the shore here from Lantern Hill. And after about 45 minutes of exploring this pond, I'm going to put the boat back on the car here. And I got some other destinations in mind to splice to this. We'll see what the weather and river levels allow. There's some still water sections of the Pawcatuck River and Quinnebog River nearby here that are impounded by some dams that it's possible to paddle upstream, turn around, and come back, avoiding having to set up a shuttle. So that's a possibility. There's also some very nice small ponds like this with plenty of little channels to explore. And this one would beckon more exploring at a little higher water level. I was having a hard time getting through those lilies back there, but if we could get some heavy rains and get this pond up a couple feet, there's lots of marshlands back there with even more to look at. And let's continue adding to this canoe adventure. Have some time the very next day to get back in the boat here after exploring Lantern Hill Pond for about an hour. Got about 4 hours this morning to explore the section of the Pawcatuck River in southwest Rhode Island that is just upstream from the old mills here at Bradford, Rhode Island, and the newer fish ladder that has replaced the mill dam that was here. And like many small to medium-sized rivers in New England, this one was utilized for industry in many locations. About every 5 to 10 miles you find a dam or what's left of a dam. And it's about 5 or 6 miles up to Burdickville, upstream on the Pawcatuck River, without much change in elevation. I believe that we should have still water or not much current between here and Burdickville. I'm going to try at least. I've never done this section of river. We've got about 100 cubic feet, between 100 and 150 cubic feet per second coming down right now, which is enough probably to run through these little slots in this fish ladder. I don't need to try it. Got a fiberglass boat. I don't need to scratch it up. It's a lightweight boat, but it is not as durable as the ABS boats. Contour map shows no change in elevation between here and Burdickville, at least not enough to show up on the map. Satellite view shows a lot of still water and a lot of old meanders and new meanders in the river as it flows through some sand plains in this part of Rhode Island. And because there's some old sand plains here and a lot of old meanders, there's probably a lot of sunny areas where we can get these mid to late summer wildflowers. And yes, some purple loosestrife growing along the banks of the Pawcatuck River here. And with low flow coming down this river and almost no gradient, the upstream paddle is really no effort. It's just like lake paddling right now. Come about a quarter mile from the Bradford boat launch, which is just up the road and upstream from that fish ladder dam. So getting some blue skies mixing in with these clouds. There's a chance of a shower today, but it already rained once for about an hour before the sun came up. Looks like things are moving out for now. We'll see what pops up. No real chance of thunderstorms, so we should be safe on the water, at least for the morning hours. And about a half mile above the launch at Bradford, the Amtrak comes across the river here. And this particular line is the main line through the Northeast states. And it's electrified, and there's trains on a regular basis. Every several times an hour you see trains go by, either going north or south. So wouldn't be surprised. I just saw one go by. Wouldn't be surprised to see another one go by soon. All kinds of interesting trees along the river here. Plenty of black gum growing along the shores here. This one's reaching out over the bank of the river. And we got some of our clethra just starting to bloom here. We looked at that at Lantern Hill Pond. There'll be a lot more of it today. Just starting to open up. Here's a late blooming azalea here. And this is probably its last gasp. Most of the ones I saw at Lantern Hill Pond didn't have flowers left, but just the spent flowers, like you see here in brown. But there are a few white flowers left of what's called swamp azalea. It's July blooming, at least July blooming in southern New England here. Azalea, unlike the May and June blooming ones you see in other parts of the country. The pink azalea is out in May in this part of the country. Flame azalea I've seen in June down south. But this one's a midsummer. Fairly small flowers, about an inch across, and fairly small leaves. But boy, I think some of these paddling trips, if you did them in mid-July, you'd see all kinds of azaleas. Because what I saw yesterday was hundreds of spent flowers on some of the bushes and only a few that were still white. So we'll keep our eyes out for this, our late blooming azalea. And we'll see what else is in bloom as we paddle along on what's turning out to be a very pretty day. And with gentle current and not much wind, this makes it easy to stop and observe the plants along the shore here. I've got some berries here. This is a dogwood. It's not quite matching the description of Gray's dogwood or gray dogwood, but it does have a cluster of berries like gray dogwood. And it has opposite branching with dogwood type leaves with that what's called arcuate veination, or veins that are shaped like an arch. So we'll leave that mystery unsolved. We got a little bit of high bush blueberry here, and boy, the birds beat me to it. We got one little itty bitty one left here. Right there, hanging down over the branch of the stream here. But with any luck, we'll find a few more. And we've got some winterberry holly here, just starting to get its berries. I'm going to try to zoom in on that. And just behind that high bush blueberry, we have a shrub here with nice glossy evergreen, not evergreen, but handsome leaves with a dark green color. They will fall off in the fall. And what's just starting to form are the fruits of this wintergreen holly, or excuse me, winterberry holly, which will become a bright red and remain on the branches well into the winter and creates a very showy appearance against a backdrop of gray or white in the wintertime. It's often found growing in or near stream sides and wetlands. So these little berries, which are about 1/4 inch in size right now, will get just a little bit larger and then turn a beautiful red color in a few weeks here. And we're just about done the straight section of this trip. It's going to start to meander in a few hundred yards here. This is wide enough and open enough on this stretch upstream from Bradford. If you had a headwind, it could be a little tricky. There's some patches of this pickerel weed growing along here. Not a lot of it at this point, but we'll keep our eyes open in some of the backwater areas. There's some old meanders that have become swamps along here. They may have a lot of it. The current here may be too strong for this really to get well established. Along the banks of this river, even though it's low gradient here with ice jams and pushy water in the springtime, it could make it tough for a plant to really get going in fast moving water. But this pickerel weed is very common in still water environments. And just behind it, seen a lot of this today, and quite a bit of it on some other paddles around here, is our button bush with these about a 1-inch diameter fruit that almost looks like that of a sweet gum tree. But these aren't trees, they're shrubs, and they're usually growing in areas with some sun at least, and plenty of moist soil, swamps, and along rivers and streams and ponds. And I was able to get a little closer to one of these button bushes. And these spheres look like fireworks going off almost. About 1.5 inches in diameter. And some of them are still green. I believe this is the flowering fruit. And then as the spines come off, you're left with this green fruit. So here's the flowering stage. And here's the fruit. And we've got a close-up view of some clethra here overhanging the Pawcatuck River here. We've come upstream about 1 mile. I'm going to try to go at least another mile, 1.5 miles. But my plan for avoiding shallow water rivers that would turn into canoe hikes is working real well right now. This is all basically one long pool upstream from that Bradford Dam. There is no current to speak of and no shallows to speak of so far. Boy, look at those pretty flowers. Sure looks like black cherry to me, but the leaves don't. They're much different than a black cherry. And the fact that it's blooming in midsummer. And quite fragrant and quite common in this part of New England. As you go inland into the colder parts of New England, it disappears. But definitely seen in the coastal, more mild parts of southern and central New England. And we're about to enter the first of several large meanders in the Pawcatuck River here. Still plenty of water to paddle in. It's not terribly shallow. I can see bottom in places, but don't believe I'm going to hit bottom anytime soon. Well, I mentioned the purple loosestrife was invasive and was probably brought here for ornamental reasons. Well, right next to this pickerel weed, we've got a native species called swamp loosestrife, which is just as pretty, I think, and native. So Plenty of it growing in full sun here along this sandbar, and I've seen quite a bit of it in places along here. So as these rivers shift directions and the currents shift and the channel shifts, it creates these sunny openings for sun-loving plants that you wouldn't find once the forest reclaims the sandbars here. And as we go through the meanders in the Pawcatuck River here, it definitely gets a more intimate feel. The river is about half the width as it was in Bradford. Part of that may be because of the small lake that's formed behind the Bradford Dam would flood a wider section of valley. And at this point, I think we're upstream of the effects of that dam as far as the width of the river goes. Let's take a look at the floodplain forest here, because, you know, a lot of places I've recorded, you've got your willows, you got your cottonwoods, you got your sycamores. Well, none of that's to be found in southwest Rhode Island. The silver maple is not here. There is some red maple and a lot of this pin oak, which is often growing in wet soils. I've recorded it in some of the clay loam soils in southwest Ohio that are they're seasonally wet. In this case, it's more of a sandy soil along the stream here, but also seasonally wet because of the higher water in the wintertime. Lots of pin oak, lots of red maple, and a few other mixed oaks and some green ash. But not your typical floodplain forest for other parts of the country, but certainly could be typical for this area. I've never paddled this stretch of river. I did a stretch down near Westerly once. Little baby turtle just came up for air. I think he disappeared though. Long time ago, and wasn't paying much attention to the trees that day. But definitely would recommend this stretch as long as there isn't too much water coming down the stream. You can easily come up and turn around at this point. I've come a mile and a half up with no resistance at all. So if you don't want to take the time to set up a shuttle, this stretch upstream of the Bradford Dam is certainly doable when there isn't a lot of water pushing back the other way. And we'll just take a look at one of these overhanging pin oaks here. So delicately notched leaves that could resemble that of the scarlet oak, but normally scarlet oaks won't grow where their feet get wet or their roots get wet part of the year. So, well, we have about 4 hours to spend on the river today. We've used almost 2 of it, and probably a half hour of that was making videos. So I'm at a good turnaround point. I've come up about 3 to 3.5 miles. Again, this is pretty much lake paddling at 150 cubic feet per second is what the gauge at downstream from here was showing. That's not a lot of water for a watershed this big, and with the lack of rain this summer, most of the bogs and swamps that feed this river are starting to run out of water to give it. And those do help protect this river from flash flooding and fast rises and falls, but pretty much lake paddling at this point. But still, the paddle has not scraped bottom yet, so plenty of water to come upstream to the Burlingame Management Area canoe campsite. And there's a campground on I think it's Watchog Pond at Burlingame State Park, a few miles from here. That feeder stream actually comes into the Pawcatuck here. It looks very narrow on the satellite view. I couldn't find a way back up it. Maybe at higher water levels. It's about another 2 miles upstream from here, 1.5 to 2 miles upstream from here, to the old dam at Burdickville, which is the first place where I know I would have to get out and either canoe hike or, you know, get around the old dam. And then from there, it looks like mostly flat water paddling all the way back up to the next boat launch. So I won't advise on that, except I would advise that lower water levels upstream from Bradford to this canoe campsite is doable for a day trip. Certainly doable for an overnight trip, and saves you the trouble of setting up a shuttle. And you know, the river looks pretty going both ways. I'm going to try to make some more videos on the way back down and do some photography as well. And you know, a nice place to go for a swim. Got a little bit of cardinal flower here. There's been a few of them along the way here. They're just starting to open up. It's a real pretty flower that grows near and in wetlands. And just starting to open up this time of year. I'll take a quick look at the map that the Wood River Pawcatuck Association, I think it's the name of the organization that monitors the water here, does a lot of the educational programs for this part of Rhode Island. Let's take a look at their map. I've got it on the tablet here. And great resource, helped me decide which section of river to try. I used the Corps of Engineers website to get the gauge reading at several locations along the way here. There we go. Get the reflection to a minimum here. So we started at the number 8 on this map, which is in Bradford, Rhode Island. And the number 9 there is the broken, or the old dam there that's now a fish ladder dam. And number 8 is the boat launch. Excuse me, number 8 is considered a caution point, and the number 9 is the portage for that symbol. But there's an access point there as well with plenty of parking, and we basically came upstream around these meanders, and we're right about here just to the west of this number 6, which is the indication of the campsite. So from here it's just a little bit further up to Burdickville Road, and I've driven across that road. I know there is a broken dam there. It says it's runnable at certain levels, but it could be hazardous. So and there was another stretch I considered doing upriver from number 10, but I didn't see evidence of any parking there on the satellite view. These people are saying that there is parking there. It wasn't showing up on the satellite view. I didn't want to take the time to go over there and not be able to get the parking I was looking for. So I opted for the start at Bradford. But this other access point at the Potter Hill Dam looks like it does have flat water paddling all the way upstream, including a very nice nature preserve that I've done hiking in the past that can't be accessed without either walking long distances on road or paddling more downstream to the preserve. There's no parking at that preserve, but it's a great place to hike if you can get there from, you know, a place that's further away parking. Let's take a look at this campsite. This is high sandbank here. I wouldn't expect this to flash flood, but the amount of sand and bogs in this area. Plenty of pine trees here. Looks like plenty of room for dispersed camping here. So, great place to spend a weekend or just a half a day or any other amount of time you have to spare. This Pawcatuck River has very few houses along it. Upstream from here, there's quite a few places where there are old dams and broken dams. But this stretch here, except for the part we saw with that fish ladder dam, is pretty much easy paddling. We'll take a couple short videos on the way back down to Bradford. And one of the places that gray birch can grow in nature, or in other words, away from man-made clearings and highway cuts and places where you often find it, old strip mines and anywhere there's full sun. One of the places it grows in nature in southern New England without the assistance of human-made clearings is along these stream banks and along pond sides. It often leans into the water, not from being undercut, but seeking out the sun. These gray birches are shade intolerant, and they will only grow where they can get some sun, even if that means growing sideways to stay in the sun. Our black willow does the same thing. I don't see any willow around here. It's no sandbar, no black willow. There may be some in some of the swamps, but I'm not seeing any along the river here. But our gray birch has these arrowhead-shaped leaves and what can be a white bark, but often it gets a little off color from things growing on it, like mold and algae and lichens. And these little fruits here, about 3/4 of an inch long, almost look like a little cone, and technically they are considered cones. So I did a lot of work on birches on my other channel. Barking Up the Right Tree is called that channel, and I did 3 series on birches this spring, including a lot of work on gray birch. And it's taken a little over an hour to get back down to the Amtrak overpass near where we put in at Bradford, Rhode Island. I can say I made a little better time on the way back, probably because there is a slight current in this river. At least there's nothing pushing me backwards. But very low water levels right now, so not much current. A couple large boulders in this area, but most of these banks have been pure sand, with plenty of pin oak growing along the side. I can say I've never paddled somewhere where I've seen so much pin oak along a river. But this is a unique area, and that's why a lot of this land has been preserved in this watershed of the Pawcatuck and Wood rivers. And the two do meet a few miles upstream from here. So above that split, both these streams are much smaller. But very clean water. This is a trout stream. And usually runs pretty clear. We're going to drift along and try to pick up the paddle here in a few weeks. Heavy rain may not be in our future. There's several more sections of this river and the Quinnebog River in eastern Connecticut that are impounded, where you can paddle up and paddle back at low water levels. There's also a few sections in central Massachusetts that I'm reading about that would allow for the same on some other rivers. And if we can get the water moving, might do some stretches where there's some easy rapids on the Quinnebog, or possibly even parts of the Connecticut River. The area around Enfield, Connecticut has some easy rapids, and a large island in the Connecticut River called Kings Island that's been on my to-do list for a while now. Might even try to sneak on out there in the canoe. If we can get some heavy rains, there's some waterfalls I've been wanting to see. We need to get some water first. And I usually start lacing up the hiking boots when the cooler, drier air returns in the fall.